Helene and Milton. In the span of 2 weeks, the United States has been hit by two epic hurricanes. Helene, one of the deadliest storms in U.S. history, and now Milton, predicted to be the strongest hurricane to slam into Florida in a century. Now, both of these storms were spawned over the record hot waters of the Gulf of Mexico, and scientists say this was not by chance. They say it was the result of global warming. And they say this means that future storms are 500 times more likely to be bigger, stronger, and wetter than anything we've seen in the past. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
Hurricane Milton is going to be a deadly and catastrophic storm.
We've never had one like this. I've been here for 38 years and never had one that forced us to do this.
Just know that if you get 10 feet of storm surge, you can't just hunker down with that.
It may be a long recovery process. That's my biggest fear, that it's going to be a long cleanup.
Some of you might still be able to evacuate safely. For others, it may be too late.
Also coming up, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry shared by a trio of scientists whose research could transform how new drugs are made through artificial intelligence.
This prize represents the promise of computational biology, that we're going to use computers, that we're going to understand disease, that we're ultimately going to make people healthy because of the work we do and the work we do with AI.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with yet another hurricane on steroids. Now, that is how scientists are describing Hurricane Milton as it bears down on Florida. That description is also meant for Hurricane Helene, which also hit Florida 2 weeks ago before delivering a catastrophic mix of wind and rain as far inland as the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina. Climate scientists say that human-caused global warming is making monster storms such as Helene and Milton 2.5 times more likely than they were before the industrial age began. And if the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement are not met, the likelihood of more mega hurricanes will increase even more. Milton's high winds and pelting rain were downing trees and power lines along Florida's Gulf Coast hours before the storm was due to make landfall. Many people trying to get out of harm's way have discovered that gasoline has already sold out in their area. Residents of some regions in its path have been warned that it's already too late to evacuate. Well, DW reporter Stefan Simons, he is in Orlando, Florida for us. Stefan, tell us what's going on where you are. We can hear that the rain coming down is heavier than it has been.
Well, I can hope you see it too. Of course, it's no fun to get drenched here, but we wanted to show you this monster storm is still hours away, even from the coast of Florida. But yet here it is. Let me tell Niels, my cameraman, to go to this side. You see this tarp there? This tarp, I can tell in a few hours this is not going to be there anymore, because if this is going to be a Category 1 in Orlando, and that's 100-something miles from where the storm will make landfall, from the Tampa Bay area or Sarasota area, that will rip this off. It's coming down here significantly more. You can see this here. We're really getting trenched. The wind is picking up. You can see that the palm trees are bending now. And where are we, Brent? We are in not a neighborhood. This is a rental home neighborhood, so to speak, like a little resort. And it's packed with evacuees who are coming here and trying to flee from the track of Milton, which will be a massive, massive, massive storm carrying disaster, really a lot of hurt and pain for Floridians. Not just now, not just in a few hours, not just tomorrow, but for weeks to come. When all this bears true, that this storm carries storm surges of up to 15 feet.
Yeah, it's incredible. And it seems you have to drive hundreds of miles if you want to really get away from this storm. Have most people followed the evacuation orders issued by authorities?
I would say yes. I think the federal government as well as the state government is hopeful that most of the people really obey to the mandatory orders. But of course, mandatory, nothing is mandatory. Even the Class A or Section A and B and C evacuation zones are, officials have to go from door to door and say, please leave, you're risking your life. Everybody, every expert, every government official, state, county, local or federal level, they all say the same. If you stay where you're not supposed to stay right now, where you were told to evacuate, you really risk your life. You're probably gonna end up dead. No, but most people have evacuated. A lot of evacuees are here in the Orlando area, coming from the Tampa Bay, of course, from the west coast of Florida, facing the Gulf of Mexico, going inland, and yeah, they made it. There were obstacles, gas shortages, food shortages, traffic jams, and so on. But a lot of people made it, hopefully, thankfully.
And Stefan, with less than a month to go until Election Day, Hurricane Milton, it is being politicized with rumors and misinformation swirling all over social media. What's being said?
Well, I have to say that's actually absolutely despicable. This is unbelievable what's going on here, how specific individuals try to capitalize on what's going on here. You see, hurricanes, natural disasters, any kind of disasters were not long ago, perhaps in the United States, a reason to unify, right? But even that is not happening anymore. Here, there's politicians out there, namely Donald Trump, who's saying really lying to people, saying that FEMA is being strapped of cash and not able to actually help them because the Harris-Biden administration or Biden-Harris administration is diverting money, which is absolute nonsense. So yes, it is completely politicized. It's unnecessary. It's dangerous because it endangers people. If you as a politician, as a leader or someone tell somebody a lie about what help they can ask for, what avenues they have to find help and rescue and so on for the days to come, that's irresponsible. At least that's what many, many people say and think here.
Yeah. DW's Stefan Ziemans reporting from Orlando, Florida, on the storm that is outside and, for many people, also inside their minds. Stefan, thank you. Well, for more on the how and why behind these monster hurricanes, I'm joined now by Shel Winkley. He's a meteorologist at Climate Central in Bryan, Texas. Shel, it's good to have you with us. Your job description includes connecting journalists and scientists and helping to understand the science when weather events come with the fingerprints of climate change. Now, climate change fingerprints are all over hurricanes Helene and Milton. Tell us how and why that is.
Right. So we can do what we call rapid attribution science. And specifically what Climate Central does is we're looking at the sea surface temperatures, how much warmer they are than what's expected for a specific time of the year, and then how those are influencing tropical systems. We know that sea surface temperatures, the heat that is in the ocean, is what fuels things like Helene as well as Milton. And what we know with Milton being the main focus right now is that where it developed and then where we saw that extreme rapid intensification, the ocean temperatures that were above average in the western side of the Gulf of Mexico were made 400 to 800 times more likely because of human-caused climate change, meaning that in that part of the Gulf, in early October, temperatures like what we experienced and what Milton fed off of, rather, would have been virtually impossible without some sort of climate change interaction.
Hey, you're talking about what's been described as storms on steroids, and we know that these types of storms are a reality. Scientists are saying that they will happen even more frequently if we allow the global average temperature to climb 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Is what we have seen the past 2 weeks, is that going to be the new normal? I mean, how long are we talking about here?
Right. So every storm is different. You've seen 2 storms that have become rapidly significant, as well as have big, deep impacts, not only along the coast, but far away from the coast. It's not to say that every hurricane is going to look like this, is going to be as impactful as this, but this tells us that these storms in a warmer climate that have become more intense, more frequent, have become wetter storms, we know that these are the storms that we now have to prepare for, and that are a very significant reality. We've seen it now twice on the western coast of Florida, and then we saw the impacts that, again, further inland, the wind radius being so far away from the center, and then the devastating flooding that occurred across the southeastern U.S. once Helene moved inland just about a week and a half ago.
Yeah. U.S. President Biden today, he issued a warning to people not to fall for the flood of misinformation on social media concerning these hurricanes. Take a listen to what he said.
For the last few weeks, there's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies. They're saying people impacted by these storms will receive $750 in cash and no more. That's simply not true. Now the claims are getting even more bizarre. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman of Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous.
Yeah, beyond ridiculous, but perhaps not beyond belief for a lot of Americans. Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, they're all over Facebook and TikTok with videos claiming that the government can seed clouds to such an extent that they either influence existing storms or that they create new ones. And they say that the vapor trails left behind military fighter jets are the proof of this seeding. So, Shel, tell me, I mean, is this true at all?
Right. So there is such a thing as cloud seeding, right? Like that is a thing that has happened with agriculture. But even if this, let's say that this was a cloud seeding event, it wouldn't have grown to this magnitude. We as humans on one particular event cannot make it a storm of the magnitude that we're seeing. And what's interesting is that when we talk about climate change, we're talking about what humans have done with adding carbon pollution into the atmosphere. The oil, the carbon, the natural gas that burns and then goes into the atmosphere as a heat trapping particle. That is accumulated over decades. And that is what we're seeing sink into the ocean to fuel these storms like Milton as well as Helene. You can't make a storm or make an impact like we have seen in a very short amount of time like this. Everyone always says, well, we had hurricanes back in the 50s. We had hurricanes back before the 1950s. We were burning carbon then. Why were we not experiencing this back then? This is something that is built up in the atmosphere. And we're now starting to see the impacts of climate change in terms of drought, in terms of heat, and unfortunately, in this specific case, in terms of tropical weather on the southeastern U.S.
You know, not everyone is armed with the latest scientific data, but everyone can use, what we refer to as good old common sense. What do you tell people who own oceanfront property in Florida or people who are considering buying oceanfront property there when they ask, are these storms something that we should consider?
Right. I think you've seen the proof that they are something that you should consider. Storm surge, and again, another part of climate change that we know is sea level rise. So the storm surge that we're seeing, part of that is a little bit higher because we have seen that increase in the ocean level itself. So for those that own homes, businesses, or property on the ocean front, those that might still be thinking about buying it, really know your flood areas, know how climate change will be changing those flood areas and what is possible. Some places say, we've never seen a flood before. That changes with climate change, whether it be because of sea level rise or because of other things that we know. In a warmer atmosphere, the atmosphere can hold on to more moisture. We're seeing more extreme rainfall because of climate change itself. So you need to know the factors and the flood potential in this specific case before you make those decisions, or if you're really trying to mitigate the harm to your property or trying to ready yourself for the next storm, we need to be factoring the climate change aspect into that for our communities.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And also maybe factor in if you can afford flood insurance, if it's even offered where you'd like to buy. Hurricane season, Shel, in the Atlantic, it usually runs until November with the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, both very warm. Should we be prepared for the possibility of hurricanes as late as Thanksgiving or even at Christmas?
So we have seen hurricane seasons in the past where on New Year's Eve, the National Hurricane Center was writing advisories for a hurricane. Now, granted, That was far out in the Atlantic in what we call a fish storm, where it just basically stays out over open water. What's interesting about Milton is that it has now become the strongest hurricane that we've seen in the Gulf of Mexico this late in the season. Typically, what we find as we get into October and then into November and December, we start seeing the weather shift and more active weather come across the United States, coming out of the Alaska area, and just your typical cold fronts moving. So a lot of times that will take any tropical systems out to sea. But I think what we need to monitor for this last month of hurricane season could be the East Coast. Not to say that there will be a hurricane or a tropical system there, but it's not out of the question as we get later into the season, especially where the ocean temperatures are.
Very good point. Meteorologist Shel Winkley. Shel, we appreciate your time and we appreciate the information, putting everything in valuable context for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, it's used by almost everyone, so much, in fact, that it has become a verb. Do you Google? I bet you do. Well, U.S. authorities say they may ask a judge to break up Google. Forcing the search engine giant to sell off parts of its business is just one option being considered by the Justice Department. Government lawyers could also seek to restrict how Google uses artificial intelligence or block it from paying companies like Apple billions of dollars to ensure that Google is the default search engine on iPhones and other devices. A federal judge ruled back in August that Google is an illegal monopoly in the United States. Well, Jennifer Huddleston is a technology policy research fellow at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. Jennifer, it's good to have you with us. Got a lot of questions for you. Let's talk first, though, about what this could mean for Google. The core papers reveal that the DOJ could target Chrome and Android, for example. What would that look like?
So the proposed remedies are probably much more broad than you might have expected if you looked at the ruling in this particular case earlier. The case really focused on the default agreements that had occurred between Google and companies like Apple when it comes to having Google as the default search engine on a browser or on a phone. Some of the proposed remedies go so far as to propose a structural solution, something that would actually break up Google and its popular products like the Chrome browser, like the Android Play Store, like the Android operating system, and put more regulations around the ability of the company to interact with these products in ways that would really fundamentally change these products as consumers understand them.
What would this mean for the consumer? I mean, I know what the DOJ claims regarding Google's monopoly, but is Google's business in any way going against the wishes of consumers?
So I think this actually may point to one of the very intriguing elements of the proposed remedies, which was kind of this idea that Google would have some sort of responsibility to educate consumers about other search engines, which seems a bit odd. Google is a very popular product because consumers find it to be the superior product. There are products out there like Microsoft Bing, there are products out there like DuckDuckGo that have tried to distinguish themselves in different ways. But when we look at places where we have seen requirements around browser selection or around search engine selection, such as in Europe, what we find is that consumers still choose Google because they find that it best serves their needs.
Well, do they choose Google, or is Google an example of product inertia? I mean, when I get, let's say, a new iPhone and the default search engine is Google, I really don't think about it, and I don't ask for something different because I'm acquainted, I'm used to Google. I mean, is that part of what's going on here, is that we're just comfortable with what we already know?
Well, you can always change the defaults in just a few clicks if you do prefer one of those other search engines. But we are continuing to see a lot of evolution in search, particularly as AI comes into play. Mm-hmm. We certainly have seen this with the way that Microsoft has been investing in incorporating AI co-pilots into various products, including Bing, and the fact that Google itself continually has to invest in AI products and in other ways of improving its search. This isn't the type of behavior you we would expect to see from a company that could just rest on its laurels and assume that consumers would stick with it. They're having to continue to meet consumer demands in order to remain that preferred product amongst consumers.
We know that Google is owned by Alphabet, and Alphabet has already said that this is a clear case of overreach. Let me ask you, is that what this is?
We saw a broad list of remedies proposed, and I think we really have to think about how these would impact consumers, as well as how many of these are actually tied to what we saw the judge rule in the case. This case was really about those default agreements, and many of these remedies go much broader than that and could have a very significant impact on the way consumers experience their devices, whether they're Android devices or whether they're choosing to engage in search at a time when we are seeing a lot of innovation and disruption, not only with AI, but with the emergence of other more specialized products as well, that particularly in kind of the search industry. I think it's important to note, too, that this is happening at the same time that there's another case ongoing when it relates to advertising. And this week, we've seen small businesses mentioning how they're concerned about how a negative ruling in that advertising case could impact their ability to reach the consumers that they want. So while we often think about antitrust just in terms of what it means for these big companies, the remedies in this case could have a much more significant impact on companies of all sizes, as well as on the end user consumers.
And Jennifer, what kind of time horizon should we be working with? I mean, this isn't going to be solved anytime soon, is it?
That's something that's really important to remember when we're talking about antitrust. These are not quick cases. Even if we see some of these remedies go into play, it will be a long time coming. The next step is to see a more specific set of remedies proposed by the DOJ in late November. Google will have a chance to respond with its remedies in near the end of the year in late December. The trial on remedies will occur sometime in spring of 2025. And then, of course, there are always likely to be some sort of appeals process or some sort of disputes ongoing. So it'll still be quite some time before we know what the actual remedies, if there are not other appeals that may happen along the way, could look like in this particular case.
And I ask you, before we run out of time, have you found yourself looking at other search engines just because of the attention that this case has received?
So I find, like many users, that the definition of search is changing. How I engage in looking for different products may depend on the type of information I'm looking. Like many of us, I am starting to use some of those generative AI tools. And in other cases, I'm going to more specialized items to find, video forward information or product reviews. And then I am still using a variety of search engines as well.
Okay. Jennifer Huddleston, as always, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Three pioneers in protein research have been awarded this year's Nobel Prize in Chemistry. The award goes to an American scientist and two British-based colleagues. Their work focused on the structure of proteins, the building blocks of life, and it has many potential medical applications.
The three researchers who won this year's award were honored for contributions that use neural networks to study a central element of life.
The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has today decided to award the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry with one half to David Baker, University of Washington, USA, for computational protein design, and the other half jointly to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper, Google DeepMind, United Kingdom, for protein structure prediction.
In us, as in all life on Earth, proteins play key roles in practically every aspect of cellular function, activity, and structure. Even the simplest are made from chains of building blocks called amino acids that are folded into complex three-dimensional structures. Each of the around 20,000 proteins made in the human body performs highly specific tasks. So if a protein is faulty in some way, it can cause disease and dysfunction. That's why predicting how proteins are structured has been a goal in medicine for decades. Half of this year's chemistry prize was granted to Demis Hassabis and John Jumper for bringing that goal into reach with the AI program AlphaFold.
Now you can take a sequence of amino acids, in principle do Google search, and out comes the structure of the protein.
Understanding the processes that lead to specific proteins also allows us to design brand new ones for specific tasks, a bottomless toolbox for future applications in medicine and many other fields. The first person to design a unique new protein from the ground up was David Baker. He's created many since.
The work is very directed at solving problems. And so when we design a new protein, we are always thinking, what medical problem or what environmental problem are we trying to solve?
Baker's dedication to solving those problems has now earned him the other half of the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry.
Well, the day continues online. You'll find us on social media. You can follow me on social media at Brent Goff TV. And remember, whatever happens between now and then, tomorrow is another day. We'll see you then, everybody.